Hello, everyone. Today we have two special guests, and I will let them introduce themselves. Me, you know who I am, Jason, author of the Pucker Factor. And who do we else do we have today?
I am Bud Gibson. Hopefully, most of y'all recognize me from the other appearances that I've had here with Jason. I do my own podcast or interview page, if you will, the Reconnaissance Cast. Hopefully, some of y'all that are watching this are my viewers and will subscribe to Jason's page. He's doing a great service by getting some great interviews that not many people are able to get, quite frank. But we have had a good read of a book that we're going to be talking about today, and I think our other guest is going to introduce himself today.
Yeah. Hey guys, I'm Jack Murphy. Pleasure to be here with you two gentlemen before. We've spoken before on other shows. I also host a podcast called The Team House, and I think there's probably a pretty significant batch of our audiences that cross over between the three of us and watch all three of these shows at various times because of the mutual interests. And so my background is I served in Ranger Battalion and Special Forces during the War on Terror years. And then I've been working in journalism and in the media for the last about 15 years. And I think today we're mostly going to be talking about this book I have coming out next month, We Defy, The Lost Chapters of Special Forces History. And this is sort of a passion project of mine I've been working on and off for about the last 10 years. And I'm really excited to finally get it out there.
I think it's really great because the overlap is that quite a few SOG guys are in your book or were involved with these operations. Now, the one thing that I know I had you on before, but after rereading your book, the Det A guys who were in Berlin, and again, I always find it kind of interesting that after World War II, everyone assumed that any SS, guy that served was thrown in prison or was, or killed. But in reality, some of them were very well trained soldiers and their skills could be used elsewhere. So there was a gentleman there, and this is the segment that I'm really interested to hear about. And he was called the Black Eagle. So can we just talk about him? And this is from Jack's book, We Defy. So
Yeah, absolutely. So that guy was someone who worked with Rocky Farr, Doc Farr, who's another Special Forces legend in his own right. Um, they called him, yeah, Schwarzer Adler, the Black Eagle, and he was a former Nazi. The Lodge Act, named after Senator Henry Cabot Lodge, was an effort after World War II to bring in a lot of Eastern Europeans into the United States military. And particularly, we brought in a lot of Hungarians, Ukrainians, Czechoslovakians, and also Germans. And we were able to utilize their cultural background and their linguistic background to run operations against the USSR as the Cold War was coming up. Somebody who is not in the book, but there's a book out there about him written by his daughter you can read, is Julius Redzinger, who was a Czech. As a teenager, he was in a Nazi forced labor camp, escaped from the Nazi camps over and over again, got to the West, worked for the U.S. Army, then doing ops across the border back in Czechoslovakia for the U.S. Army against the communists. It's just a complete crazy story. And then he got brought into 10th Special Forces Group, and he taught escape and evasion because he had so much experience with that particular topic. And I was told that one of his tactics was that, during wartime, there's a lot of unattended women at home. And he was able to make his way through the underground rat line by servicing those women every step of the way until he got back to friendly lines. So that's just a little nugget of knowledge you can put in your back pocket and take with you if you ever get into trouble. Um, but yeah, so Herman Adler was on Rocky Farr's team. He was one of these guys who was a former Nazi. I know Bud actually turned up a picture of him that he just showed me before we started the show. That blows my mind. Um, and that picture you found, Bud, is him in Vietnam, and that's another interesting facet of this is that there you go. Look at him wearing his tigers. So some of these guys, they were by the time the Vietnam War rolls around. I mean, imagine if these dudes were 18, 19, 20 during 1945. By the time Vietnam comes around, these guys are kind of long in the tooth. And a bunch of them did get deployed to Vietnam. As Bud points out, Bob Charest was in Vietnam with a handful of them too. And they were not happy. At least from what I understand, they were not too happy about being deployed to Indochina after they're kind of like, hey, we paid our dues, right? Another guy was Kunert. So a funny story about Kunert in the beginning of the book is, because
That's my favorite.
the Detachment A in Berlin was an undercover unit. They were clandestine. So their accountability formations in the morning were held inside the hallway rather than out on a parade field. And the sergeant major one morning is walking down the hall and he's saying about how there is an upcoming reunion for D-Day in France. And this would have been in the late 1970s, like 79-ish, 78 maybe. And he's going down the list, and there's a couple people raise their hands, like, "Yeah, I was at D-Day. I want to go to this thing." And then he comes to this one guy named Kunert, and Kunert has his hand up, and he's like looking at him, and he's like, "Kunert, you weren't even in the American Army in 1944. What do you do? What?" And he like clicks his heels and stands at attention. He's like, "Ja, I was in 7th Panzer. I was at Normandy. I want to go to the reunion." Like, no, you're not. No, you're not, Cooner.
And
Can't
now,
have this.
and now I also read it in your book that was the CO or the team leader that he was a Jewish guy,
Yeah.
right? Now
Yes.
that's got to
Not,
be.
not just Jewish, but he was a Holocaust survivor.
Oh,
Sid Shatnow. And I spoke to Sid shortly before he passed away, and it's unfortunate that I didn't. Fortunate all around that I wish we could have done an interview, but I mean he was so far along. I mean he had to be with his family, and he had better things to do than talk to me, of course, which I totally get. But he did write a book. I think it's called Strength and Honor, if I recall correctly. Um, but there's not much in there about his time in Detachment A, but he was the commander of the unit at one time. Absolutely.
wow. So, Mr. Gibson, did you have a question about some other chapters in the book? Not the
Oh,
book.
yes, I do. And wow, guys, I know it's unprofessional, but I just had to Google Mr. Major General Sidney Shachnow. Geez, ripe old age of 83, combat infantry badge, Silver Star, Bronze Star, 3 times, 2 Silver Stars, 2 Purple Hearts,
Wow.
tour in Vietnam. Just look that up, and then he's also with Det A and Delta. Got a little history with them. Good Lord, there's a lot of stories, guys. I've heard the names. We've all those of y'all that follow me and Jason definitely have heard the Vietnam names. But the stories with these names that we've never heard before come out in these books, and it's just a fantastic book. And I thank Jack for helping get me a reduced priced copy, if you will. Um, yeah, I was curious, and gosh, there's just so much you could talk about Dead A. It's such a unique organization with what they were doing and what continued on into the future. But as we're moving along here, one thing that I was very glad to see come out in this book, because as far as I know, other than just mere mentions and maybe Shelby Stanton's books, or just a overall view a book on the special forces, Det K. Very interesting group of men. Um, can you kind of talk a little bit about their formation? In
Yeah, yeah.
40, was it 48? They ceded control, the control of the military went to the PMAG, and the North Koreans were not having South Korean government thinking they were, still in control. Can you kind of talk to us
Yeah.
about what
Yeah, yeah.
formed that?
So Yeah, I mean, to a very quick abbreviated
Yeah.
history
Oh yeah.
here. A lot of Americans think that the Korean Peninsula bifurcated in during the Korean War. It actually happened in 1945 at the conclusion of World War II. The communists took the North, obviously, and MacArthur and the United States Army had to rush from Japan to the Korean Peninsula. They were expecting a years-long campaign in Japan, and then Hiroshima and Nagasaki happened, and the conclusion of the war comes about abruptly for the army.
Yeah.
So we flood in, we take the South. And yeah, you have PMAG and then KMAG. I mean, these are kind of like bureaucracies that you guys are very familiar with because of Vietnam. MAC, Military Assistance Command Vietnam. This is Military Assistance Group Korea, and same sort of idea behind it, right? It's an advisory body. By the time you get to about 1960, 61, there is some thought about creating a resident special forces team in Korea, in South Korea. There were already special forces training exercises taking place where we were having teams doing infiltrations into South Korea, exercises in South Korea. We were taking South Korean soldiers, bringing them to Okinawa and training them up as special forces soldiers. But as this relationship develops between South Korea and the United States, there's this thought that we should have a permanent resident team in Korea. We also had them in Thailand, in the Philippines, in Taiwan, interestingly. A lot of people don't realize that. And, Bud or you, Jason, I mean, I would love to see one of you guys write a book about the team in Thailand, because I think you've spoken to some people who are there, and that is a lost chapter of Special Forces history right there.
Oh yeah.
So that is basically how the detachment comes about. It was first called Detachment 40, and then it became known as Detachment Korea. And it exists, interestingly, unlike the other programs in this book, in We Defy, Det K still exists. It's still around to this day. Yeah. And I mean, I've spoken to guys. I spoke to the SOC Corps, Special Operations Command Korea commander. I spoke to him like a year ago at a conference. Det K is still going strong, man. They're still doing stuff. And so their job is twofold to describe what the resident team actually does. The first one is that it provides liaisons to different South Korean brigades, to the special forces, South Korean special forces, but also the conventional brigades. And you will have a Det K guy actually embedded in the brigade, and sometimes in the office right next to the commander. The other function that Det K has is to act as the receiving party. What that means is if North Korea invades South Korea, you're going to have PACOM and all of these American forces rushing towards South Korea to defend. And what Det K would do is receive those units, American infantry units, Navy SEALs, special forces teams, receive them and take them and put them where they need to go on the front lines to do their job in accordance with, its op plan, da 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 da. We have op plans for everything, including this.
One thing that, and I'm going to jump around here a bit and give Bud a minute to think about the next thing he's going to ask, is to the new viewers of this interview or open chat, it sounds crazy, but there was a time when that the U.S. military were testing, actually attaching a small nuclear device onto a paratrooper or whatever onto their leg, and people are probably going, "What are you talking about?" So, can you just kind of briefly talk about that, because I think that's just wild, and what the range was of this device and what its purpose was for.
Yeah, so absolutely. It sounds like Dr. Strangelove, but it absolutely happened. Started in the 1950s, we started making miniaturized atomic devices. An early one was called the MADAM or MADAM. It was that was something that you had to like load on the back of a truck, though.
Okay.
So by the late 1950s, as we're getting into the 1960s, there's some thought: can we miniaturize an atomic weapon to the point that you can put it like in a backpack and have it be man portable? something in like the 1 to 5 kiloton range. And so it went into development. They fielded it with the intent that a couple of different things, but one of the main ones is we felt that, the Soviets had the drop on us when it came to tactical nuclear weapons. And this device that was being developed, which became known as the SADM, the Special Atomic Demolition Munition, would fulfill that capability gap that we had. Nowadays, things that we would use, things like the JASM, like cruise missiles to strike a target. We didn't have that kind of precision munition back in the day. So the idea was that you would parachute a special forces team behind enemy lines with a backpack nuclear weapon, and they would target bridges, dams, railroad junctions, mountain passes, enemy troop formations, ports. And most of it was geared towards, if the Soviets came rushing through the Fulda Gap and we had to defend Western Europe. But as I came to find out during my research, there were targets in Cuba, there were targets in North Korea, there were targets in the Trans-Caucasus Mountains. The Panama Canal was a target. I mean,
A
there were
few that they weren't even that the guys didn't want to mention. I remember fifth group guy said he's like you would think it was outrageous. I'm not going to mention the targets.
Yeah, yeah. They were targets in the fifth group area of responsibility. So I mean, what would that be like? What would we? I mean, are we talking about Iran? What's going on here? But I guess the long story short is there were targets all over the world, and there were contingency plans to kind of turn off parts of the world if the Cold War went hot.
And did
And
you ever, sorry to interrupt you, Bud,
no,
but did you ever meet anybody who actually carried one?
So this is an interesting thing. Most, I guess I could not prove to you, and I don't think the guys themselves could ever prove to me that they ever handled an actual live device. Now, General Potter was, who's a 10th group commander, was responsible for doing like a quarterly or yearly inspection of the bunker to inspect the nuclear devices to make sure they were there. It was part of his responsibility as the commander. But when these guys were training, they were doing jumps. They were doing subsurface swims with it. They were doing free fall jumps. They were skiing with it. All this sort of stuff. All these like kind of like running around doing training exercises. Those were inert devices. They were almost exactly like a live device, including the weight of it. And it was highly classified, even the inert version because of the design, but it did not have fissile material in it. Um, was there anyone who ever had a live device that I spoke to? I mean, I definitely spoke to people who said at certain times there's weird stuff going on where they issued the device to me and it weighed a little bit more than it normally did, and there was be like more security around the training exercise than was normal. There's always somebody, including the guy who jumped with it, had a fully loaded, pistol with live ammunition because they were authorized deadly force to defend even the inert device. But yeah, whether or not they ever saw a real one is an interesting question. I have one friend who passed away since I interviewed him for this book, Mike Adams, was fighting off cancer for like 10 years, a lot of weird cancers. That his doctor's like, I don't understand how you could even have this unless you were exposed to radiological material. But I can't prove it. There is an interesting story I can tell if you guys are interested
Yes,
about
please.
ODA 745 in 1983. So this team, these teams, they were known as green light teams, got called up. They were on alert all the time. They could be alerted and brought in and spun up for a live mission at any moment. And it happened quite frequently that they would be brought in, spun up, go through their whole planning process, and then be told, "Okay, guys, go home." And like you think you're about to go on this op, and it gets shut down. I've talked to guys who got issued the device and got out to the airfield, or got out to the airfield and were issued ammo, and then the thing gets shut down. There's one one instance I'm aware of, ODA 745. They get called in, brought out to Pope Air Force, Pope Army Airfield, right next to Fort Bragg. They get issued live ammunition. armed guards come out with the SADM. That gets issued to the team. It does not have any inert stickers on it like it normally does. A C-130 aircraft comes in and lands, and a couple of guys, literal MIBs, men in black, wearing black jumpsuits, no insignia, no name tapes, nothing identifying them, get off the ramp of the aircraft, and they announce, we now have operational control. And they tell the team to rig up for a free fall jump. They rig up the device, everything. They get on the plane. They're not told what's going on until they've been flying for a couple hours, and they're told that their target is a dam in Cuba. It's a dam that they have prepared targeting packets on in the past. They're very familiar with it. So the aircraft is flying nape of the earth. It pops up. They lower the ramp. The entire team goes out the door. Once they get down to the drop zone, they successfully land. And the second they hit the ground, a pair of like car headlights flips up on them, and someone starts yelling index, 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 or end of exercise. And all of a sudden the team is surrounded by these like people with clipboards, and they're asking them questions about like their mental state. Like, how are you feeling right now? How do you feel about this mission? Like, are you positive? Generally feeling positive about your chances of success? These kinds of things. And they're like Army psychologists. They're people from Lawrence Livermore Labs, the Defense Nuclear Agency, these guys, the team, like their hands are shaking. They're like they thought they were in Cuba up until the very last second. That's an example of like, holy shit, what's going on here? And I think that these exercises, that's the only one I know that got that far along. I mean, that's kind of fucked up to do that to the team if you think about it, but. There were a lot of alerts that felt very, very real to the teams. And I think I would speculate that what was going on there was that the Pentagon and the Defense Nuclear Agency, which has since been folded into called DTRA now, the Defense Threat Reduction Agency, that they were testing them to see would they actually use this capability? Like if we issued this mission to a team, would they execute on it? Because of course, with any kind of nuclear weapon, I mean, one of the points of failure is the human being. Mm-hmm. Will the person that mans the nuclear silo actually turn the key and push the button? Will he do it? Will he follow orders? And I think that's what they were trying to ascertain there. And clearly, the people who were asking these questions and doing this testing just did not understand special forces guys very well, because these dudes are a little bit more off the res than the average person. And that's another interesting takeaway about Greenlight for me was it sounds crazy. There were no extraction plans for a lot of these missions. Most of the guys understood this was a one-way trip. No one was coming home. Wow. But they were all totally serious about it, and they took it extremely seriously. This was considered to be like an elite status to be on a Greenlight team because you had all this training, you had all this priority. You were going to get whatever you needed to do your job. And if they got the word to go, I have no doubt in my mind they would go. They would execute it to the utmost of their ability.
Yeah, they made that clear with making sure the two guys that had each of the 8 numbers, they were like, that's insane. What happens if the guy gets killed? They made sure someone knew the entire code on the entire team. And that kind of brings me to, before we go to another portion of the book, unless Jason has one after this, I was curious, the thing that jumped out at the end, to me, just thinking about it, and I'd like to gauge what you thought about it. The vet, I don't know if it's Mr. Flavin or
Bill Flavin.
Yeah, Captain Flavin was he the one that may have thought it was a psyop on the Russians?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
I mean, I think absolutely the Greenlight program and the SADM in general was to confuse the enemy's decision-making process. Those missions were kind of like Mission Impossible or Mission Implausible. Bill's point was that if you think about the alert sequence, so the Soviets initiate World War III. However that takes place, they're going to initiate the war. Okay, now the Pentagon alerts the Greenlight teams. They get called in. they get spun up, they get issued their ammunition, they have to get issued the device. In the case of like some of the 10th group teams, like the device would come from a nuclear bunker. Some of the people declined to tell me where that bunker was, but it's in a NATO country.
Yeah.
They would have had to retrieve the device from the bunker, get it to the team, and then a lot of these teams were flying to England to a base in England, transloading onto another aircraft, and then they would fly onto their target. So Bill's point was that by the time they got to their target, those targets, a lot of them would no longer be relevant, because they would already be destroyed by something else, or the Soviets will have, gone so far past them. It just doesn't really make a difference anymore. So the program confused the enemy's decision-making process. If you're a Russian military planner, you can't discount the possibility. It's something you have to defend against. And so was the entire program a psyop? I don't know if I necessarily believe that. I think it started off as a very real functional, or the idea that it was a real functional capability that could be used. But I think there's definitely a psyop component to it. Yeah, absolutely. It's, you want to live rent free in the minds of those Soviet military planners and get them thinking in all kinds of different directions.
Crazy Green Berets walking around with a nuke in their pocket.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my God, that was a great part on that. I mean, this that whole section, guys. I've spoken to a man on a green light team, and it's quite amazing because you go into detail also that you're not jumping, you're not jumping the device. It's jumping you. You're not swimming the device. It's swimming you. You're not skiing the device. It's skiing you. I found that to be, just thinking about trying to manhandle that device off the aircraft and then through the water or wherever they're going, had to be insane.
Yeah, I mean, jumping it was crazy. It was really hard for guys to get stable in the air with it.
And these are great. As you clarified, these were top-notch halo jumpers and,
Oh, yeah.
static line jumpers. They weren't just normal, these were the cream of the crop guys.
Getting the device neutrally buoyant so that you could do subsurface stuff with either scuba tanks or the Draeger, the rebreather, was super difficult. Skiing with it just sounded ridiculous. I'm like, what?
Yeah, that's a no-go for me. I mean, I may enjoy skiing, but ain't no way I'm going to be hauling a 80-pound trash can behind me or in front of me or what have you. That's not happening. Jason, did you have anything you want to jump in on or jump to the next portion?
What chapter did you of your book did you enjoy the most? Writing or researching?
Yeah, that's really hard to say.
I want an answer. I don't.
Yeah, they were all interesting and had their own unique challenges in different ways. In some cases, it's just really hard to find the right sources. In some cases, it's a matter of finding the right people. In some cases, things come together quite quickly. Once you find the right people, and they'll introduce you to some other people, and it happens. Trying to convince people to tell you things that were once highly classified can be difficult. And then you have personalities. You have to learn how to interact with different personalities. As I was writing this book, I came across one instance where the sergeant major I was talking to got up irate with me because he thought that I was talking to another sergeant major that he had beef with going back to Vietnam. And I'm like, I've never spoken to that guy in my life. Don't blame me. It's just all kinds of like unique and interesting experiences. And I mean, I got to interview probably 100 people in the process of writing the book. And I mean, so many incredible people, incredible personalities. As far as like what chapter was the funnest to write, man, you guys know the deal. I mean, you're really excited and really passionate about the topic, but by the time you finish writing the chapter, you're like, oh my God, I'm done with this. Like I spent so much time on this, going over and over the facts over and over again to make sure everything's right. By the time, I'll tell you, getting this book out next month is a relief for me. I'm like, finally, it's there.
A labor of love in every sense of the word.
Yeah, for sure.
So right now, and I'll turn it back to you in a minute, Bud. Right now,
Yep.
people can buy the PDF on Amazon or
the Kindle version.
version. Right.
And it's available for pre-order on Amazon right now, the Kindle version. You don't have to have a Kindle, by the way. You can use the Kindle e-reader app on any device you prefer, or your computer, whatever the case is. On December 9th, when the book is released, there will also be a paperback available. So if you want a hard copy, it'll be there.
Okay, so when that date, I mean, this will be up and running, hopefully, later on today or tomorrow. And then what I'll do is when the book drops, then I'll put the link in the thread there.
Yeah, I mean, you can put the pre-order link in there
Sure. Yep.
for the Amazon, and yeah, and like I said, for some reason Amazon won't let me set up pre-orders for a paperback. I don't know why. So sorry guys. I know people keep asking me, will there be a paperback? Yes, there absolutely is. This is a proof copy of the book that I got. I had to do 3 rounds of proofs, make sure everything was good. But yes, there will be a hard copy.
Okay. So back to you, Mr. Gibson.
Yeah, I before we go to it'll switch around, I'm sure, but blue light is one of my favorites. But before I get to that on my side of the questions, I thought a very interesting part, circling back around to Det K, people might not know. I guess me being a little bit younger, I definitely had no idea. But maybe some of the older people don't either, because some of these are pretty obscure incidences. It looks like the incursions that the South Vietnamese had to put up with, and I'm forgetting. I know in 1968, I believe an exercise had just ended, and a crazy, shall we say, cross-border operation that North Korea mounted, kind of was actually successful for a little while, killing civilians and all of that.
Yeah.
Could you speak a little bit about the incursions and what Det K was trying to do to counteract that?
Yeah, that was mostly in the 60s and 70s, where the North Koreans were essentially sending death squads south of the DMZ. Really like reign of terror, like wiping out villages and killing civilians and things like this. So when that happened, the South Korean military would, of course, spin up their people, and the Det K guys would help facilitate that. Sometimes it was like facilitating transportation on U.S. Army helicopters or an airplane, and sometimes they were actually going out as advisors with them. And so the Americans were not getting into firefights with these North Koreans. However, they were, behind the last cover and concealed position, so to speak, as the South Koreans went and addressed that threat. There's some interesting stories about North Korean infiltrators getting kind of corralled and pinned up on a hilltop by the South Koreans, and they would swarm up there, and then the Americans would come and see the bodies, and the guys had like a nice little pattern of bullet holes in their chest, like that big around. It's like, oh, okay, guys. Another guy I talked to saw a North Korean prisoner interrogated. Yeah.
Yeah. The rocks they were. I've heard guys that specifically Marines that came in contact, force recon guys, when they were doing cross training. The rock boys were hard as hard as woodpecker lips. I mean, they did not give any mercy.
Yeah. Yeah, so those incursions went on, and Det K had a role in countering them, and then of course the Det K wasn't I don't think specifically involved in this one, but I mean the one that most people know about is the Blue House raid.
Yes,
where the North Koreans sent in like a couple dozen guys to assassinate the South Korean president. It's kind of crazy to think about. I mean, the Korea in the 60s and 70s and even into the 80s was pretty crazy. It was pretty nuts.
From reading it got wild. I mean, and not to give away, too much of what's going on, because there's a lot of action in there, but the tunnel teams and all of that, I found that pretty cool to, it's seems like everywhere we go in Southeast Asia, we're having to deal with tunnels, and it sounds like North Korea had some pretty hardcore tunnels.
Yeah, I've actually been in one of those tunnels.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I think it's Tunnel 3. Maybe it's Tunnel 2 and Tunnel 3 are open like as a tourist. You can go and visit them.
Wow.
Yeah.
That is crazy.
And
How big are they? Are they just man size or are they?
no, they're like the one I was in was probably big enough to drive like a Willie Jeep down.
Oh,
Wow.
Yeah.
wow.
Jeez. Man, that's crazy. And guys, y'all are I really enjoy Det K, that chapter. I mean, every chapter is great, but Det K and Blue Light were absolutely amazing. Jason, did you want to knock out the first or did you have any questions before we I go along?
Go ahead, sir.
Okay. I was I forgot when you first wrote your first piece on blue light. A great article. I think it's you can actually Google blue light and it's literally a PDF that comes up. Um
The
where
article, the original article was actually published in The Drop, which is the Special Forces Association
okay.
magazine. And what is going to appear in the book next month when it comes out is an expanded and updated chapter based on more information I found out since that was originally published.
Wow. Okay. Okay. Well, I mean, with all your, military contacts and all of that, being as Delta blue light, it's all supposed to be secret, and you kind of cover that at the end. I thought that was a really, really good little point on what's going on in special forces and the SMUs. But where did you first hear about blue light, and where did you first come across your first vet that served with blue light?
Dude, man, like all of these chapters really, well, not the SIF I knew get that, and I crossed paths with guys who were in the SIF when I was in fifth group myself and at Bragg and all that, the commanders in extremis force. But the others, Det A, Det K, blue light, green light, those were like kind of like stories you hear about in the stairwells of fifth group. They're like stories that you hear little bits and pieces about, like in a team room, or like one of the guys who's been in group a little while longer is like, oh yeah, there was this mission with backpack nukes. So it was like more like whispers of things that I heard about. Uh, like America's first counterterrorism unit, military counterterrorism unit, Blue Light, was one of these things that I heard about. But I mean, if you try to look this stuff up, you can't find anything about it anywhere. On Blue Light specifically, there's about a paragraph in Charlie Beckwith's memoir. There is maybe a page about it in Rod Lenahan's book, Crippled Eagle, which is very good. I hope people can get a copy of that. So I mean, I first heard about it like that. Who was the first guy that I came in touch with? I mean, I recall, and I have to dig into my memory banks about how all this stuff came about. I recall I was really trying to reach out to Taffy Carlin and Mark Boyott. Those were a couple names that I had turned up who were involved. And I think I first got in touch with Mark, and I think Mark got me in touch with Taffy. So Mark and Taffy were like young team leaders in 1977 who were on Blue Light. And Mark went on to become the third group commander, and Taffy went on to become the fifth group commander.
Wow.
Um, and so yeah, I think Mark put me in touch with Taffy, and Taffy was like, "All right, listen, man, you come down here to Fayetteville, and we'll sit down and I'll talk to you about Blue Light." I was like, "Okay." So I went down there and I met with Taffy and with Mark and with a couple other people down there, and that was how I got my foot in the door on that story. And I was able to talk to the unit sergeant major on the phone, Earl Bleacher. And then I was able to talk to a few other people as time went on, finding out some more information and, some interesting, characters that, I found out later that I expanded this chapter on. John Mullins had a
Mm.
small role in Blue Light in the maritime aspect of it. I didn't even know they had a maritime department until he told me about it. And Katie McBriar, which is
That was going to be one of my questions is
yeah,
talking about Katie. That she seemed like a hell of a lady.
Yeah, I mean, Katie is a hell of a lady. She still is today. When I wrote the article, it was an article initially. Um, the guys, Taffy and Mark and them, they told me about Katie, this woman named Katie McBriar, and how awesome she was. So she was a intelligence analyst assigned to Fifth Group, and the Fifth Group commander, a guy named Colonel Montel, Bob Montel, had this conception that we need to have a woman on this counterterrorism team. Um, she can go places and do things that the guys can't. We can dress her up like a nurse or a flight attendant or whatever the case may be to get close to the aircraft and gather intelligence. And so he offered her this position. This was 1977, and Katie is the first woman put on a special forces team ever. And
Wow.
there's some trepidation about it at first, but the guys came to really, really admire her and respect her. She jumped out of airplanes. She shot a 1911 pistol. She was hardcore. So I could not, when I was writing this initially, I could not find Katie. And this is one of those interesting things about when you start writing a project like this, you don't know how it's going to affect people. Um, I came to find out that Katie's son found my article about blue light, printed it out, and gave it to her on Mother's Day because she had never told her kids really what she had done in the army. And he hands it to her, and she was like, "Oh my God, I can't believe this." And so Katie then reaches out to me,
Wow.
and we started talking. Katie is married to a Grenada Raider, an Army Ranger named James Bradford, who is featured in Joe Musia's new book, Cry Havoc, about the Rangers that jumped into Vietnam. So Katie's husband has his story told, or a part of it, in Cry Havoc. We Defy will tell a part of Katie's story. And yeah, she's super cool.
That's that. I mean, I'm about to hand it to you, Jason. And before we close, we're gonna end up having to talk a little bit about SIF because I still
Sure.
don't have much understanding. I mean, I do, but anyway, blue light. I don't want to skip over everything, but I also don't want to give away a lot because, as we just covered, not a lot out there on blue light, and people are gonna really, really enjoy this. If you're anything like me and Jason, and well, anybody else that likes Vietnam vets and such as that. Um, as we were talking offline, we got a lot of battle hardened, combat tested Vietnam vets, a lot from the special projects such as SOG, Project Delta, Sigma. Um, what do you, and we're going to the very end here. What's the deal with the blue light Delta Riff?
Mm.
And I before you answer that, I've got to say, as bad as it went and it's described in the book, I do have to say I give credit for the MACV SOG vet, him standing up and saying what he said and not trying out. I mean, that took some balls to stand right in Charlie's face and say that.
Yeah, well, I mean, as you guys know, I mean, these dudes were like Vietnam era special forces dudes, didn't take any shit.
No.
That's just how it is.
Yeah.
Um, the rift between blue light and Delta is probably going to be the most controversial part of this book, I think. A
Mhm.
lot of the guys still have a grudge about this.
Mhm.
Um, so what happened, to back up a little bit? Um, Charlie Beckwith understands that the United States Army needs this counterterrorism capability. The Army is unconvinced. However, you have a series of events taking place. Aircraft hijackings are becoming a thing in the 1970s, to the point that like Johnny Carson is joking about it on television. Like this is something that is started to occupy the minds of the United States government, and we don't have a response to it. You have the Munich massacre happen. You have the Israeli raid on Entebbe, and you have the Germans go down and do a aircraft takedown in Mogadishu. Some Red Army faction people holding the aircraft hostage, and the United States military is looking at these scenarios as they play out and saying, "Can we do what the Israelis did in Entebbe? Can we do what the Germans just did in Somalia?" The answer was no. It was definitely no. So that is what finally got Charlie's unit authorized. Now, Charlie, Colonel Charles Beckwith, or Charge and Charlie, was um, he went to a special air service exchange and served with the SAS. And so he was building his new unit, Delta Force, kind of on an SAS model, so to speak. And along with that model, he's like, I need 2 years to train and assess my team. And the Army is like, well, what if an aircraft gets hijacked within those 2 years? And he's like, don't call me. We won't be ready. And he was like, and the Army comes back like, no, you're going to go, So what happens is that an interim capability is stood up for that time period. And that's what Blue Light was. That the mission came down to Colonel Montel, and he started setting up Blue Light, and they brought in the NCOs, pretty much everyone on Blue Light, all of the NCOs were Vietnam veterans. The only ones who weren't were like the officers who were a little younger. Taffy Carlin, Mark Boyott, few of those guys. But all of the NCOs were MACV SOG guys. They were on the special projects. They were Mike Force dudes. They were all like pretty grizzled veterans, like definitely not guys to screw with. And so the rift comes about because you have these two counterterrorism capabilities existing side by side, and the feeling amongst many is that they're in competition with one another. Mm-hmm. The reality is that Blue Light was always a stopgap. It was not going to be the official full-time counterterrorism unit. Delta was going to be, and Blue Light was to kind of bridge that gap, right? But then there was also a lot of bad blood between some of the special forces guys and Charlie Beckwith personally. Not with Delta itself or with the people in it, but specifically with Charlie. And that goes back to when Charlie was in charge of Project Delta in Vietnam. Project Delta, separate from Delta Force. I know this is confusing, but there was, Beckwith was abrasive. As his nickname implies, he was a hard charger.
Oh yeah.
He had a temper. But he was also a patriot. He loved America, and he foresaw that we needed this capability before everyone else. And he had the stubbornness to get it punched through. Yeah. But back during Project Delta in Vietnam, a lot of special forces guys blame him for high rates of casualties and a lot of deaths that took place. A lot of some operations that some people feel should not have happened or should not have been executed the way Charlie did. So when Blue Light was finally stood down after they had fulfilled that, year and a half, 2 years of their existence, Delta Force and Charlie wanted to recruit from that pool of guys who had already been doing this mission. And so they held a big briefing, and it did not go well. It did not go well at all. There was first off, he looked at Katie McBriar and he said, "There's no place for you in my unit." Full stop.
God.
Then the other issue was, Charlie's methodology, and he had the right methodology, was that we need to assess and select all of our personnel. And a lot of these guys, they were grizzled Vietnam veterans. They're like, why do we need to reprove to anyone who we are? You already know where we've been and what we've done. I mean, what's the point of this? And then the bad blood from Vietnam specifically comes up, and one of the veterans stands up in Blue Light, and he says, "So hey Charlie, your unit is called 1st Special Forces Operational Detachment Delta. So does that mean this is a special forces unit like the one you destroyed in Vietnam?"
Oh,
and
mic drop.
That was pretty much the end of that briefing right there. And no one from Blue Light volunteered to go to Delta selection. However, down the line, there were, I believe, 4 people from Blue Light who ended up in Delta. One of them was Taffy Carlin. Another one was Marshall Brown.
Wow, that it's as you were saying with the bad blood. I mean, heck, Charlie didn't. I should say Colonel Beckwith, and show him the proper respect. He I mean, his little recruiting poster that he put out after he cleared out
Yeah.
everyone as soon as he got there, guaranteed a medal, a Purple Heart, or a body bag. I messed that up,
Yeah.
but
A medal or a body bag or both.
yeah, there we go. I mean, he made no qualms about it. And you've interviewed of a lot of men that I know, speaking to them more about their Vietnam service, and they did mention their Delta service, Mr. Phil Hansen, Mr. Mo Elmore,
Yep.
and
Yep.
they mentioned there was some bad blood at that time. Mr. Mike Vining was around at that time. We spoke to him. It's just a shame that old uh old wounds that never healed got in the way of that, because had they got some of the men that did not choose to go even later on, I mean it would have even been better than it was, because Delta was like a Ferrari at that point in time with who they had in it, of course. But I mean there's several names that you mentioned in there that didn't go, and you could only imagine what it would have been like having those guys on board with their expertise that they had gained.
Yeah, it is. And, in these elite units, you have some really strong personalities,
Oh
and some of
God,
those
yeah.
personalities clash. It's almost inevitable, right? When you recruit, train, select, and assess a bunch of like alpha males and put them in a competitive environment, that's
Woo!
gonna happen.
That's gonna be real bad.
Yeah.
Did I think I really, as I said, I don't really want to give away. There's a lot of good stories. There's another woman, Frenchie, that comes up, Miss Frenchie. That's a
Yeah.
wonderful story. A lot of stuff on Mott Lake, which is interesting because I was very curious about it. Uh, I was curious about the SIF, but Jason, do you have anything? I know we may be taking up a lot of time here. Did you have anything?
No, if you want to ask that last question, let's try
Okay.
to keep it to we'll run
Yeah,
this for like in 10 more minutes. So
yeah. The SIF one was about the last one I had to be. Yeah,
go ahead.
yeah. I was just gonna ask. You covered Delta, and it looks like SIF was made there, kind of at the beginning, to be almost like you were describing blue light in the immediate situation overseas in case an attack happened, an embassy was overrun. But then it becomes almost like uh, the Green Beret, the Special Forces mission on steroids of training local forces,
Mhm.
other special ops groups. What exactly was or is the SIF? I think it may be trying to come back under a different name, but what was the SIF?
So the history of American counterterrorism is a bit more convoluted than some of the books out there will make it seem. And I made an attempt to tell the story in a more complete way in this book. I guess readers will let me know if I did good or not. But
You did. You did.
um, so you have a number of different things taking place at the same time. We talked about how there's blue light and delta going on at the same time. Roughly around that same time period, what you're having happen is, blue light is stood down, but special forces wants to retain this capability. It feels that this direct action mission, this hostage rescue mission, is something they want to retain internally. Um, Other things you have happening at the same time is over in Europe. Uh, the Det A, and then that unit became known as PSSE. They had a counterterrorism mission
Mhm.
because the European theater commander wanted a counterterrorism capability to deal primarily with aircraft hijackings. And then as Delta gets stood up, and they are my understanding was that the European combatant commander actually wanted a Delta Force squadron permanently put in Europe, to respond to emergencies. And Charlie and Delta were like, that's not possible. They only had two squadrons at the time, A and B. So obviously, obvious to us, you have one that is on alert, ready to go, and doing training there at Fort Bragg, and then the other is doing their professional development schools, going home on leave, all that kind of stuff. There's like an up cycle and a down cycle. So there's no way that you can have both squadrons at 100% alert
Operational.
at both times. Like it just doesn't work for a unit like that. So when PSSE got closed down in 1994, it might have been. No, it was even earlier than that. It was by the end of the Cold War. Probably by 90, they were closed down. And their counterterrorism capability got transitioned over to 10th Group proper. The 10th Group SIF was stood up, the Commanders in Extremis Force. Same thing was happening at Charlie 37 in Panama. Those guys down there, they got a task order in 1977. I don't think their SIF actually got stood up until 1980. But there's like 5 pages, I think, in the book about C-37 and the crazy things that they had to do to get that unit stood up. But the concept now is that you have the combatant commanders have their own in extremis force that can be alerted at a moment's notice. And they are forward deployed to Okinawa, Germany, and Panama. So theoretically, they can reach the site of the emergency faster than the guys at Fort Bragg. This is the initial conception of it. And the idea is, let's say an embassy gets taken over, an American embassy gets taken over. The SIF would fly in. They would get there first, surround the compound. The snipers would start gathering intelligence, and you'd have assaulters there ready to go to execute the emergency assault plan if they started executing hostages. Delta would come in behind them. They would take over the assault portion. The SIF snipers would probably be left in place since they've already been observing the target for so long. And that's kind of how that interaction would take place. That's not really how it worked out in reality. I have not been able to find any example where that scenario I just described actually happened. Mm-hmm. And as I understand it, because it was never used the way it was intended to be used, that's part of why it was shut down. It was just during the Trump administration, the last Trump administration, that the SIF was shut down. That's the gist of it. There's a bit more the stuff in the book with Phil Hansen, and at the same time, all these things I've just described are happening. In the 1980s, they're standing up a series of courses on Fort Bragg. So the blue light cadre stuck around Mott Lake, and they formed SOT, Special Operations Training, where they continued to use a lot of those tactics, techniques, and procedures. Later, Phil Hansen and others kind of take this, and SOT continues to exist, but now they're creating Sephardic, which is sort of like the qualification course for SIF guys to certify them to do that hostage rescue mission. And so Phil, being a former Delta guy, former Delta Sergeant Major, was responsible for taking that certain skill set that Delta has and whittling that down to the specific stuff that the SIF needs to know to do their part of the job. And that's what Sephardic was. And then over time, you had Cephalic get stood up, which is different. That's to train the ODAs in the direct action mission.
Oh, yeah, that's one thing that's abundantly clear. While they were activated, there was in the 80s, and Mr. Phil, they were doing a lot of training and a lot of new tactics coming up through all of that. I mean, it was just that whole chapter, to be honest, is just a huge history lesson, because I'd heard the terms in podcasts and your podcast, but it had never been broken down that succinctly like that. That was wonderful.
It was. I mean, this is the first time that I think anything like this has been written about the SIF. Unless you have a top secret clearance and access to the classified histories within these units. I mean, I've been told there is a history of the SIF that maybe it's still being written, maybe it's done now. But if you don't have a clearance and you don't have a need to know, you're never going to read it, which is unfortunate, I think. This chapter in the book, I think for the first time, it tells the story about the legacy of blue light and how that got carried on through SOT, Sephardic, Cephalic, and into the commanders in extremis force. It's such a big topic that, I mean, you probably notice as you're reading it, I'm kind of going through at 100 miles an hour there were all these like actual non-combatant evacuation operations they did. They were in North Iraq after the Gulf War. And then during the War on Terror, especially A-15 and B-23 were in Iraq and Afghanistan doing tons of operations.
Oh yeah.
And that's like a couple paragraphs in this chapter. Like that could be a book in of itself and probably will be one day. And then it goes into the SIF being disbanded. And, when Chris Miller was the Secretary of Defense, who wrote the foreword for the book, by the way.
Great forward.
And but the capability, the hostage rescue capability has kind of been done away with in Special Forces entirely. The links between JSOC and Special Forces are kind of eliminated at this point. But the direct action capability exists. Every ODA has that direct action mission in their skill set. It's part of the METL, the Mission Essential Task List for Special Forces. So that's what Cephalic does. It completes that, keeping those skills current within the ODAs. The SIFs have transitioned into, the last I knew, they were called the CTACs, the Critical Threat Advisory Companies. And my understanding is that they are eyeballing the WMD mission, the counter WMD mission, which the SIF had. The SIF had a counter WMD mission, and there's some interesting stories about that in the book and the training exercises they did. But it looks like the SIF is going to, or the CTACs are going to continue to have that mission set.
Wow. That's amazing. Absolutely amazing.
And I know that for myself, I mean, it's sometimes people, when they watch these podcasts, they have information to share. So if anybody has any information about what Jack has been talking about, or we have been talking to Jack about his book about, you can always contact me or Bud or Jack. And if it's private, of course, it can just stay between you and Jack, so we can help you out and your viewers.
Yeah, I thank you for bringing that up, Jason. I, as an author, I fully acknowledge that there is going to be people coming forward after this book is released and be like, oh, okay, but hey, what about this other stuff? Like, what about this side of the story? There's going to be more information that comes out. It's possible that I got something wrong. I really worked hard to make sure everything is factually accurate in the book. But if I got a date wrong, if I got something wrong, I'm open to fixing it in a future edition. So if you think that there's something that doesn't quite read right to you, or you think there's a little bit more to the story that I should have covered, absolutely feel free to reach out. I would love to talk to you.
And I know that, again, I don't want to speak for Bud, but for Bud and I, that many family members have reached out to either one of us and said, hey, we've got these pictures and we'd love to share them with you because don't know if you have any interest. And you look at a picture and you go, oh my God, that's so and so. So anybody that can help Jack out on this book, like I said, please reach out.
Yeah, I mean, there could be down the line a expanded or revised version of the book with updates and maybe even another chapter based on some of the stuff I'm working on now, going back to Europe. And then down the line, this is getting ahead of myself a little bit. There could be a volume 2 about all the stuff that SF did in Central America, in El Salvador and Honduras in the 1980s.
Oh, yeah. Wow.
It's funny, when I first started my book series, I thought, okay, I'm just going to do one.
Yeah.
And then okay, I'm going to do 2. Then, I did 5 in the Pucker Factor series. And I will admit that I have gone back to the first one because I have. Yes, thank you, Bud, for that. Yeah.
Hey, I'm rocking my Fallout guy shirt here.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. And I have gone back to the first book that I did and added some information because family members or veterans have gone, hey, this or that. And especially as a kind of closing aspect, I really find the Lodge Act, interesting because I did a big section in my first book about those men who joined SOG, right? And Julius was one of those men, And he is actually one of the men that I added when I revised it, because unfortunately he passed away. But his daughter, I know her. And
Is it the Nine Lives of Julius?
yes,
is that the book?
Yeah,
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 it's awesome.
Yeah. So, I really it's really important. And same thing, in my books, if I have something wrong, I mean, I really want someone to reach out and say, and I will say, for myself, and when Bud and I talked about this on our chat that we had, you gotta be, if with these veterans and yourself, I'm sure that you're going to get an answer which is very abrupt and very, yeah, you got that date. It's not going to be candy coated, and
okay.
Yeah, and that's the way that you have to be. But do you have a closing comment, Bud?
No, I just wanted to let Jack know that he really knocked it out of the park. I definitely learned a lot. I thought I knew all there was to know on Dead A, especially, but boy, he really pulled the rug out from under me on that. And then Blue Light, I've been searching ever since I think Jack put that piece out that's on the internet, and I mean it is a wonderful book from start to finish, literally. So Jack, you just knocked it out, man.
Thank you, Bud. And I feel like this book, in some ways, it's sort of like the sequel to the work that you two guys do. It's like the question of like, what happened to these guys after Vietnam? And the ones who stuck around in special forces, what did they do? Where did these Sun Tay Raiders end up? Where did these MACV SOG guys end up? And I think this book answers quite a bit of that. So it was, yeah, I mean, it's interesting. When you title something "The Lost Chapters of Special Forces History," the issue with that is that you can write the book forever and it might never get done. So I kind of stopped myself at a certain point. I had 5 chapters. This last year, I felt like I could see a light at the end of the tunnel, and so it's time. It's time for it to get out there.
Well, that's good. Well, thank you very much. And I would say, as a parting note, that Jack did send, a copy of the book to Bud and I, and Bud and I were privy to read through all of it. And I did thoroughly enjoy it. And it did answer some questions, especially about the Dead A guys, where you have Mr. Nick, Uncle Nick, one of the most colorful SOG guys around. And so it does answer a lot of questions. So thank you again for coming on. Thank you, Bud.
Absolutely.
Don't go anywhere, guys. I'm just going to end this thing for the public. So
thanks, guys.
Yeah, thank you very much.